Hi, this is Pete Duranzio, PD Programming, and we're going to be looking at Crash Magic collision diagrams today. In order to do a training, first thing I do is pick a configuration, and the one that I picked for yesterday's beginner training was Plano, Texas. I'm going to use that again today since we've already got some stuff in there, and because many of the people that are on today were also on yesterday. So I'm going to log in here. And this is our demo instance. As you know, you'll be using your own hosted instance, so you'll normally click here to get into the program. We're using this one today. All right, so there's Plano's logo. You would see your logo there as you prepare to log in. And something I did with the training yesterday is I tried to take the most basic paths for everything, so really cover the very most general stuff first, fewest steps, and then when in depth, I'm going to do the same thing with the diagrams, and then we'll dive into the details of them. But hopefully what that means is maybe in 15-20 minutes we'll have covered all the basics, and then we'll move forward from there. By the way, for those of you coming on right now, or those of you who have been on the system already, in the top left corner of the GoToMeeting dialog, there's a little orange icon. If you could click on that right now, and the first option in there says edit your name and email. If you would edit your name so that at the end of it, it says parentheses and where you're from. I know most of you, not positive I know all of you, but it would be helpful just to have a handle on who's online. So you just click edit your name and email. You change your name so it's got your city or agency or company at the end of it, and then there we go. Thank you, Maria. And that'll help me. One of the things it lets me do is know what features are being taken advantage of by the people that are at the training, as compared to just guessing or trying to cover everything. Okay. So, as I said, we've already got some stuff here from Plano. In order to create a collision diagram, we basically created a study. Maybe this was the study here, Custer Road and Parker. And in order to do that, we just picked an intersection name, a time period in our study panel here. And once we had that, we clicked up here to get a collision diagram. And in this case, a four-way intersection. So I'm going to click on that, and this is essentially where the training starts. And so this is a collision diagram. Your most generic collision diagram will actually look a little bit more. Let's see if we've got I might have to delete one to get to the most generic. Well, we don't have to start with the most generic. So the things that are configurable in a collision diagram fall into two categories. One of them is how PD programming prepared your configuration for you. That can be changed, but we've already set it up initially. And the other is what you can do just as you're running the program. So the things that we can prepare for you and that we can show you how to, and then the documentation shows, but it's really part of your configuration, are things like what symbols to use. So do we use a red circle for an injury? Do we use a solid red circle for a fatality? Down here we've got a little green triangle indicating a third vehicle involved in the crash. A headlight indicating that it was at nighttime. These should all be flagged down at the bottom in the legend. But these are configurable. We have an agency, I believe Nebraska is one of them, where they have really pretty much redefined some of these. We have a star for fatality. We have half circles indicating property damage. We have full circles indicating injury. Full black circle indicating just a crash. In other words, every crash gets a circle of some sort between the two arrows. So those are configuration options that we can prepare. How these fixed objects are interpreted is something else that can be configured. So some people will do fixed objects and they will have just one, just a general fixed object, anything labeled fixed object. Others will do it based on what the fixed object type was. Others still, and I've seen a few people that have done this, have set it up such that those things that the agency would like to bill back for example, something that might be done on private property you wouldn't bill back for, that would become civil process. There'd be something where the city might bill back to a person involved in the collision, or the state might want to bill back depending on whose property was damaged. And you could change your symbol for that so that you could easily identify those on the diagram. Extra data is used in some agencies. Arizona and some California cities are using this. Let us know if you ever want to do this to yours, but what we do is we put a little star on the vehicle that was at fault. In California, their data says here was the vehicle at fault, and they tell you the number. In Arizona, it's always the first vehicle in the crash that's at fault. And in other agencies, you may or may not have that information. And if you have it and you'd like to show it, that's the symbol that we would normally use for that, though we can certainly use other symbols. And we have a variety of symbols. Something we're working on right now, again for Nebraska, is we've prepared some diagrams where the circles no longer overlap the heads of the arrows. The circles are actually in between the two arrows. I'm really intrigued. I'd like to find out if other people are interested in that as well. I think I've seen many collision diagrams in the past that were that way, but after having done this for 30 years, I've kind of gotten used to the diagrams having the arrows under the symbol, under the injury symbol. So I'd be curious if anybody prefers to see them in between the two arrows, because we'll have that as an option very soon. Not much more to do on that. Okay, so those are things that we do to prepare the program to read your data, make your collision diagram. There are rules that we set up. After that, you've got a diagram, you can make changes yourself. So let's look at some of those changes. So first of all, you have your diagram, and one thing I can do is I can click on one of the crashes. You'll notice as I mouse over it, it highlights. There are 4 buttons here that indicate what should happen when I click on it. The very first button is the Click on Information tool. So if I click on this crash, we take this data and we show data from the crash. So we've gone back to the database, looked at what generated this crash, and we listed some of the fields there. This is something that you can configure, which fields you'll show. I'll do that in just a moment, but I can move around and click on any of the crashes, and each time I click on a crash, data from that crash shows up on the right-hand side. So to change the fields, I can click on that listing right here. This button is used anytime you're going to pick a field list. You'll see it in some other places in the program as well, the exact same icon, and it basically means I'm going to let you select a field list from the program, and they're used in a number of different places. This one's called Basic. We have one called Contributing Factors. This is one that I've created in my own account. And so that's got a bunch of contributing factor fields up at the top. And I'll try to click on one here. I believe the click on one also uses one of the features of the program, which allows us to embed a link, some image from somewhere else, into the program. And so in this case, it's embedding a Google map. And there are 2 ways that we do that. This is worth noting depending on the type of data you've got in your system. One way that we can do that embedding is we can do it based on the lat-long coordinates of the crash. So if all your crashes have lat-long coordinates, we can use that to display it. And what that actually means is this image would be offset a little bit. If the crash was here, we'd actually be centered on that spot. Or if it was down here, we'd be centered on that spot. So it's a little bit more powerful. Shows right where the crash was happening. The alternative is what we do in most cases for most, I guess, historical configuration stuff we did more than a couple of years ago, is we just look at the primary and cross street, Custer and West Parker, and we have Google geocode that, and then we bring that up. And so you'll see Custer and Parker, and that's the intersection. We're also able to show, depending on data that you have available and information you have available, we're able to show other types of images, let's say hard copies, scanned images, stuff like that. So if you have scanned images and you have them on a server where it's available to go look at via, for example, a browser, we can make a link directly to that in here. In other situations, we have people who have the data, but they keep it on their own servers in-house because that means it's private information. They don't want to share that. Doesn't need to be out on the web. And in that case, we can create a link as we have here. And what this would do in this particular client's case is it fires up a little plugin we have, a little program we have on the local desktop, and opens up a file folder, a database, or what have you, whatever you have locally on your network. And the nice thing about that is it's not exposed anywhere on the internet. In fact, our software, I can't even get to it. So if I click on this person's RMS link, I'm really not going to get anywhere. Here's what it's trying to do, but it can't get there. Okay, in fact, that might have done more than I wanted to not get there. What basically was happening there, let's go log back in, is that it attempted to access a page that is not public, that was only on that person's network, and as a result, when I didn't have access to that, it just rejected that. It just said, sorry, I can't get to that page. Okay, sorry for that little diversion there. Let's jump into Custer and West Park where we were. One of the nice things about this, by the way, is you'll notice any work you've been doing, if you log out, crash out, whatever you do, when you come back in, all that work was still there. Any changes you've made, settings and so forth, are all still there. Okay, so what we were just doing there is we were just picking from field lists that we can use when we click on a crash. In addition to picking from those field lists, and if you are a beginning user, chances are someone has already created some of these for you. We tend to create at least one during our configuration process, sometimes more. And so you'll have access to those, and they'll generally be in the category of shared. Once you've worked on the program for a while, you probably will have some in personal that you've created. A good way to get started is to find the click-on one, that's this one here, and to click on duplicate. In most cases, you won't have access to manipulate the original click-on field list, but you can manipulate one that's in your personal account. So when I click on duplicate, I get click on copy, and I'll rename that, and let's call this one click on for today. And I'll rename that. And you'd name that something like for bicycles or turning movements or whatever you're looking for in that particular click-on, or basic, complete, stuff like that. So I have this one, and I'm going to now edit it. And what the editor does is it gives you a list of all of your fields from your database. So every agency has their own list of fields, their own list of lookups for those fields. This should be familiar to you when you click on it. In this case, this one would be familiar to Plano, Texas, but wherever you're from, your list of fields came from your agency or from your state DOT. Okay, so in this particular list, I like having a case ID in the Google map. Let's get rid of everything else. Let's assume we're really kind of starting from scratch here. And what I'll do is I'll pick some of the fields I want. So I'll just run down the list. I've already got case ID. Activity ID looks like it's a secondary case number for the system. And I'm going to choose it because many of you probably have this type of a field where the state has provided an ID number and the local agency has an ID number, and they're both in the database. PD programming, when we prepare a configuration, will always use the, how to put it, the most global, the most unique of those values. So in that case, it's usually a number that the state provides if you're using state data. And then we also provide as extra data your local agency's case ID. So I'm putting in the case ID, activity ID. Let's put in add intersection. I'm just going to control click on some of these now. So I'll choose contributing factor 1, and we'll choose that for the first 2 vehicles. Crash severity might be useful in this case. Always like to get distance and direction so I know if we're actually at the intersection there. And incident num, there's our secondary one. Case ID is a special field that PD programming creates that points to one of your unique fields. So it's always going to be the unique field that is most unique across the database. It's the one that uniquely identifies that crash. We always leave you with your own case ID fields as well, whatever you've done, like incident num or activity ID. Okay, go through there. Manner of crash would be useful. Motor vehicle action, 1 and 2. And we'll keep going here. Vehicle direction, 1 and 2. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I've got a bunch of these selected. I'm going to click the blue button. Before I do that, I want this to appear under Google Map. I want these 3 fields up at the top. So I'll click there to cause everything else to appear under it. I wanted to get incident number up by the top. So we'll put that up by activity ID, and you'll see case ID will match one of those. I'm assuming it's going to be activity ID, but case ID will match one of those. It's just a pointer into one of those. All right, what else do we want here? We want to get our distance and direction up a little ways. Okay, and then whether it's flagged as add intersection and the other fields that we created. Okay, I'm going to choose save and return. And click on for today is now our listing. And now you'll see this information over here change to show distance and direction, add intersection, and the other fields that I chose. And now that's the case for any other crashes I click on. Okay, you'll notice all the ones I'm clicking on here are flagged as at intersection, and they have distance from intersection 0 and no direction. Note that we have a filter enabled. This information up here is your study information. It's the same as what's in the tree on the left, and it's telling us the location that we've chosen. It's telling us the time period, and it's telling us what the filter and the category list are. So right here, it's noting that I have a filter in place. I'm curious what's in that filter, so I'm going to come down here to the filter, and I'm going to select it. And what I see is we have a bunch of filters, and the one that's checked says intersection related. And so it's looking for distance from intersection less than 100, or distance from intersection less than 250, and manner of crash is rear end. So this is sort of a more of a contrived intersection related. This is something I created and decided this was what I wanted. Another option would be, let's uncheck that, another option would be looking at the actual field at intersection as an option. And those do yield different results because one of them was the officer or the person doing data entry's view of whether it was at the intersection, and the other is more calculated, looking at the other fields in the database. So now that I know what it is, I'm good with that. Actually, no, I'm not. Let's get all the crashes in there. So I'll clear that. That should give us some crashes out here that are further from the intersection, like these. And when I click on those, I should get distance and direction from the intersection. So this is an angle collision 250 feet from the intersection, and for both of those reasons it's not showing up once we limit it to 100 or 250 rear end. Okay, I mentioned that we had a bunch of symbols down here. Just because I'm seeing one over here, I'm going to take a look at, that's a bicycle symbol. That's basically a pedestrian symbol with a couple of wheels on it. I want to see if we have any other interesting symbols. Here's something to note, depending on how long you've used the program, our original configurations for intersection magic and then at the very beginning of crash magic used the same, this line right here, if you can see that vertical line in between the two arrows. We used that to indicate a rear end collision. Problem was we also used that same symbol on the tail of an arrow to indicate a stopped vehicle. And initially, for several years, in fact this is what it would look like here, for several years it was always the case that a stopped vehicle in front and another vehicle traveling up behind it, when it was a stopped vehicle, that was going to be a rear end collision. But as it turns out, not always the case. So what we've got is two different ways of showing, or two different symbols. One for rear end, that's this guy right here, and one for stopped, that's this guy right here. So in this case, you have two vehicles having a rear end collision. That's that symbol, it means there was a rear end collision, but this vehicle was not stopped. This vehicle was still moving. Whereas in this case it was stopped. So essentially the change that we made back then, and we've incorporated this into most people's configurations, is that the stopped vehicle now is a symbol with a line in the middle of the arrow, or up a little ways up the arrow, rather than right on the tail where you couldn't tell if it was a stopped vehicle or just a rear end collision. This is an example of a stopped vehicle being rear-ended, well, being hit by a vehicle from the rear, not flagged as a rear end collision. So if I go click on that, the manner of crash was labeled as an angle. And maybe that's because we had a third vehicle involved. Not exactly sure. That's what that green triangle is. And maybe that third vehicle was really the second one in. Not really sure. But in any case, this was not flagged as a rear-end collision, but this was a stopped vehicle at the time of the collision. Okay, let's see if there's other interesting symbols here worth taking a look at. That's not an uncommon thing. This is a rear end. It was flagged as a rear end collision, but we had vehicles headed in opposite directions. And what frequently happens here is you'll have an officer who has seen the crash, two vehicles. Let's see if I can draw this rather than try to describe it, because my artistic talent is so phenomenal. Let's see. If you have a vehicle here and a vehicle here, I'm not going to draw the arrowheads just yet, and this guy is going north, and the officer comes along a collision and says, oh, we had a rear end. This guy had thrown his car in reverse, therefore he's going south. got a rear end collision because he threw his car in reverse. Well, the way we'd prefer to diagram that is if he had said the vehicle was going north, but backing. That's what the symbol we would have drawn. And that's a preferred drawing of that same thing. But we do have cases where the officer determines that the vehicle's direction of travel is the actual movement of the vehicle as opposed to the orientation of the vehicle. And that may be what we're seeing here. All right, other symbols, I've pointed out the nighttime symbol, and we've seen injury symbols, third vehicle symbols. That's a side swipe symbol on there. This jaggy line here, we have two different symbols for cars doing something that is not standard driving straight. You'll note that on there there's one that's called erratic and one that's called out of control. If a vehicle is not straight, backing, overtaking, something like that, and we don't have a specific symbol for it, we'll call that erratic. We do that with changing lanes. We do that with, what are some of the other examples of that? Tanya, do you recall other ones that are used for erratic? Off the top of my head, I'm not coming up with them, but basically my definition of that, our definition of that is this driver was in control but not doing something standard on the road. So we put in this erratic symbol. This symbol, out of control, means the driver was out of control. They were skidding, they were rolling over, something like that. We do have a rollover symbol if that's one of your codes, but if you have a crash where one of the vehicles was out of control, that's the symbol that you're going to see on there. Okay. That's most of the symbols that are used on here. I think I'm going to give you a quick demonstration. Do we have anybody from Nebraska here? I don't think we do. So we'll sneak in and look at their configuration without them knowing. Do we have them on demo or configs right now? You're not going to answer me, huh? I'm just going to take a quick look. If we have Nebraska on here and I can show you one of their diagrams, it'll just give you an idea of the level of configurability if you want to show something special.
They're on demo.
They're on demo?
I don't know what the data is in there though.
That's all right. Well, we're already in demo, so let's go chunk over here. The reason I show you this is if you're using the software and you're saying, oh, you know, I'm doing this big study on cell phone use, or we've got a lot of deer crashes, and you happen to have data for that, it can be very straightforward to change a symbol so that you see a particular symbol for every one of those crashes that you're specifically looking for. And this will be an example of having changed essentially the injury symbols on the system. The severity, injury severity. State of Nebraska's got a pretty good sized database. 131,000 intersections ran through. So their symbols look like this. They've got a, as I mentioned, a solid star for fatality, a solid circle for an injury, a half-filled circle for property damage, and a regular circle for a non-reportable. Now this is actually, we haven't quite moved along with the rest of their configuration. This is what they're running right now, what they use right now, but what we've recently done is made it so the arrows are now separated by the circle. The circle lives in between the arrows, and that will soon become an option in our configuration, actually something we can just switch to, turning it on and off. It'll be pretty easy. That should be done in pretty short order. So that's going to be a new style of diagram we can provide. It doesn't mean you have to use these symbols, but it means that the crash graphics will be separated. The vehicle graphics will be separated and put a circle in the middle. And the circle is a little smaller. The vehicles are a little shorter. Any questions on that before I leave this? I probably won't come back to this configuration. Okie doke. As you're using the program, by the way, when you come back in after you've left it for a while, you can see the last study that you were on, and these are all ordered in sequence based on the last time you went to one of those locations, one of those studies, so you can get back to right where you were working. Okay, and as I said, it remembers where we were, what we were doing at that point. So what are some other things that we can do with this diagram? We just did the click on and got a look at different fields that we could show in the diagram. Let's go to the diagram settings tab. As you may know, every report on here has a blue tab and a green tab at least, and the blue tab is always your report and the green tab is always the settings for that report. And the settings tab should contain all of the settings that allow you to manipulate the diagram. So I'm going to choose the settings tab and see what sort of options we have here. So one type of option we have is the spacing. This is the distance between each of the crashes. And in this case, we've set it to 50. I'm actually going to do a quick change here. I'm going to turn on what we've called the grid behind the diagram, give you an idea of what that spacing actually looks like. Okay, so on this grid, there are 1,000 units from here to here. That's the same for every one of our diagrams. There's 1,000 units across the diagram. Each of the crashes, each of the crash graphics are 50 units, or each of the vehicle graphics are 50 units long. And what you're seeing right now is 50 units between the centers of the point of intersection of each crash. That's what that 50 is for spacing. And so if I wanted to change the spacing to, for example, 100, when I come back and look at the diagram, the crashes are spread out, which works well if you've got a diagram that doesn't have a lot of crashes on it. You want to maybe annotate it, do other stuff to it. This allows you to spread out those crash graphics, and they're now 100 units apart. Everything that we do on the diagram, anything we display on it, are all referenced in those units. So for example, we've also put the activity ID as the label. That's their case ID number as a label. We've made it 12 units high. I can make that bigger. We'll make it 16 units high. That 16 is in terms of the same units on the diagram. And what that allows you to do is if you send this out to a plotter, to a large-scale plotter, you would see the crash, the labels enlarge with the crash graphics. So you wouldn't have little tiny labels on huge crash graphics. So it basically just makes the entire diagram scale up together. Okay. So pen width I won't go through, that just makes the pens a little thicker. You can turn on or off the title at the top, and you can choose to show or not show the legend at the bottom. A new feature from probably about a year ago is that you can change the north arrow's angle. And the north arrows for most of the collision diagrams are up in the upper left corner. Though in some places, because of the layout of the diagram, we've had to move them somewhere else because perhaps there's a road coming in at an angle here. But in most cases, you'll see the arrow will be up there. That allows you to indicate that this diagram is not directly pointing north, which would be the default. All right, as I mentioned, you can turn on and off the legend. We also have a number of schematics for the program, which is essentially the curb lines. Where do we place the crashes and where are the curb lines for those crashes? I'm going to show you that on the actual diagram because we've got a button down here that does the same thing, and that's available when you're looking at the diagram. I'm going to skip background. This was a great idea that really didn't come to pass very well. We have a much better solution coming up soon, so I'm going to just skip over that. It was designed to let you put a raster image photograph underneath the diagram. For intersections, it's really not a great idea. It doesn't help a lot. Okay, back into the label. So I mentioned we had activity ID there. That's because I had set this at another time. I'm going to change that, so I'm going to just delete what's in there. If I just delete it and leave it, what will happen is the diagram will put square braces around the label, and it'll use what it sees as the case ID number. Might be the incident ID, case ID, whatever field we've used as your primary ID will appear there with square braces. Those square braces are an indication that you haven't set a label for yourself. If you want to set the label explicitly, you can click on this button. If you know the exact name of the field, you can just type it in. No such field. But if you don't know what the field is and you click on that button, this list box on the right will tell you all the fields you have, and you can put in any of those fields. So I could, for example, put in weather insert that, and now weather will be one of, at least one of the fields that will be showing up in there as a label. Weather shows up there. And now you have weather next to each one of the crashes. If you've played with the filter mechanism before, very important thing to understand in the program is how the filters work, and we'll probably cover a little bit of that today, not direct focus. I think we've got a good filters training recorded, and we'll certainly do more of those. But it's important to understand filters. But that same syntax can be used here when you're building a label. So I have weather, and I could also, for example, put in lighting. But if I do that, right now that would be an error. I wouldn't be able to figure out what to do with that because it's just two fields. You're basically saying this field, this field. You need to add them together. And so I could put a plus there. They would say put weather and then put lighting right after it. But that would be smushed. It would say clear, dark, all in one word. If I do this, as with the filter editor, I've now put a space in between weather and lighting. And so now I have something that'll probably look okay on the diagram. This allows you to do some very complex stuff if you want. You can have if statements in there and so forth, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet function that allows you to say, you know, if it wasn't clear, then we'll put in what it was, and if it wasn't daylight, we'll put in what it was. Otherwise, we can even leave it blank, and that way you'd only show adverse weather, or you'd only show nighttime labels. So those are all your values for the labels. Okay, we haven't we moved a few crashes. I'll show you moving crashes in just a moment, and this is how you will reset them. So I'm going to go back and do that right now. This button up here zooms out on the entire diagram. So I mentioned we had 4 buttons here, and I showed you the first one was the click on information tool that gave you this click on report. The second one is the move tool. This allows me to grab a crash graphic, any one of them, doesn't have to be the highlighted one, and move it on the diagram. You can use this to make sure things don't overlap. You can use it if you're doing a presentation to someone who needs to really know exactly where the crashes happened as opposed to schematically where they happened. If you know that this crash really happened right there because you've got an image of that from the officer's narrative, you can do that. You can show, look, all of these crashes are actually not happening approaching the intersection. They're all happening in the intersection at the same spot. Figure it out. So you can move those crash graphics. As I've needed to mention in the last few trainings, there's a bug in the program that at this stage, if I just went down and clicked on the print, those crash graphics would not be where I left them. If you're editing the diagram, when you're done performing your edits, please just click back in the tree, right where the name of the diagram is. It'll be blue, and that will store that information for you. And at that point, you can do anything else. Printing will print properly and everything. What happens is moving them initially doesn't save them. And so therefore, if you jump into print, they're not saved. They're in some other location. So that's moving crash graphics. Rotating crash graphics. I can grab a crash graphic and spin that around. This is useful if you're using a schematic that has non-cardinal directions. So you have a northeast road coming out of there. Or if you want to represent that this crash, you know, oopsie daisy, happened something like that. Someone was turning, was doing some awkward movement in there. You can rotate the crash graphic. You cannot move the individual arrows on their own. The arrows are oriented based on their direction of travel, and that's where they sit. Last, while you can label all of these crash graphics with a rule, so you can say I want weather and lighting conditions, I can explicitly label one of them, or any number of them individually. So I can choose this one, say this is near the point. And so now this particular crash graphic has its own label. And I can do that here. Hello. I'm on the rotate tool. That won't help me at all. So in this case, you decided not to use rules, or you used rules for some of the crash graphics, but you wanted to call out a couple of them. And this is how you call out those individual crashes. And again, that's saved with the diagram. And so when you come back to that diagram, after going somewhere else, jump off to this diagram and come back. All of those changes are maintained along with the vehicle movements and so along with the moved crashes and so forth.
Hey Pete, I have a question.
Please.
If you're just trying to label one differently than the others, is there a way to change the text color for just that one label?
You know, until now I'd never thought of that. As I was clicking on it this time and trying to see which one I had just changed, that's a good idea. No, you can't right now. I will see if we can introduce something like that to essentially add color to the one that you modified. At the moment, that's not doable.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Tanya, would you make a note? We're in the middle of a rewrite of the core of this program that is going to be extremely important to all of you. Some of you already know it's important. Some of you will know as soon as your browser is updated next time. But this program runs under essentially HTML4. And the latest HTML is HTML5, has been for a few years, and we haven't moved to that. And as a result, when we show our diagrams, we're showing them in this thing called an SVG viewer. I'm sorry, this one's in Silverlight, but we've also used SVG. It's how we draw the diagrams, and it also has to do with how we lay out the whole window. It's the reason you have to use Internet Explorer with the program. We also somewhat support Firefox, though they've made a few changes recently that have made that a little more challenging. In the next month or two, I hope to have completed the port, and we will be running in a different browser, any browser at that point. I probably will not make a color change like that until that port is done. I'm not making many new feature changes until we've completed that port, because that's a high priority here right now. Okay, roundabout extra information. Okay. Let's jump out here. So we've used those 4 buttons now to rename, to rotate, to move, or to just click on. And if you hadn't caught it, as I do this, I'm actually scrolling my mouse wheel. If you have a mouse wheel on your computer, that's the easiest way to zoom in, zoom out. You can use this as well. All right, so the last thing that I hadn't shown you here, let's see if I can find something that looks more like a T-intersection, at least if the data looks like it. Not really. We're going to pretend this is a T-intersection, however. So we're going to pretend that this is a T facing east, and so I want to change my schematic to reflect that. Right now my curb lines represent that it's a 4-leg intersection. Down here is our schematic selection. If I choose change the schematic, I'm presented with a list of the available schematics, and they have things like approach schematics. This is where you'll just get one leg of the intersection only. So if you're studying one leg of that and you don't need to see all these other crashes that were down below that, you can do that. You just pick which leg of the intersection you want to look at. Corridors, I'm trying to think if they still have a place, because right now if you've got address data or if you've got milepost data, you're better off using our dynamic schematics. So I'm gonna say these corridor ones are probably not appropriate anymore. They're left over from intersection magic. They work, but they're probably usurped by our newer technology that allows you to show real corridors. These are the old corridors that they show one stacked on the other. So as you move across a long roadway, we'll actually stack them up. Doesn't look as clean. Okay, 4-leg intersections with one turn coming from the eastbound direction, one turn coming with lanes showing from the eastbound direction, and so forth. 2 turn lanes, 4-leg intersection with a boulevard going east-west or a boulevard going north-south. And here we come down to our T intersections, and we can have T's with turn lanes. I was just looking for a T facing east, something like this. I think we did that yesterday, so I'm going to grab one with lanes just to give you an idea of how that differs. So in this case, I've got my T intersection, but we've also got lane markers in there. Now, most people's data does not include information about the lane that is sufficient for us to place it in the appropriate lanes, but you can nonetheless use the features of the program to drag your crashes to show that they are in a particular location or in a particular lane. That's even more useful when you're using turn lanes, which you can also choose from here. So if I chose a schematic that had turn lanes, let's do that. I think we had a boulevard with turn lanes, 4-leg intersection, 2 turn lanes, east-west. Let's try that. Okay, so in this situation, it can be handy. I've already moved this crash. It can be handy to show those crashes. Oops. Click on the Move tool and put my crash into the turn lane. So if you're looking at the narrative or you're looking at the hard copies and you figured out exactly where these are actually happening, you can place them more appropriately on a diagram that looks a little bit more like the intersection. I'm clicking there to make sure that all gets saved, and I'm going to jump out here and do a quick print. So in order to print this, all of the printouts from the program come out as PDFs. So I click on the print, and I choose PDF. This then just re-renders the diagram, throws that into a PDF, and then offers that for download. And so that's your diagram with the appropriate schematic and with the crashes moved to where we move them. And this is a template as well, something not everybody's aware of. This blue area up at the top, the text that's shown up there, the size of that, even the size of the diagram, that's all configurable. That's something that you could choose to create a different template for, or have us create a different template for if you like, so that it standardizes what your diagrams look like, specific to you. Same thing with this information over here, the number of crashes, the filter name, and so forth. That can all be customized. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. I'm not sure if this feature is enabled on here. I'm just going to give it a quick shot. Let's do that. If this works, I'll describe what it is. Otherwise, I'll describe it without showing it to you. Right. Okay, what that is, and it works on your system. It'll work on the hosted just fine. I think we just don't have a license for the demo. This is an export option. And more specifically, and the reason why it's here is because it allows you to export the crashes, the collision diagrams, as vector graphics, so they're scalable. So the types of formats that we put in here, among some of the raster formats, are MicroStation DGNs, AutoCAD DWGs, AutoCAD DXFs, EMF. I'm trying to look for any of these that are vector. PostScript is vector. These are raster plot formats. So the reason this can be useful is if you are, for example, going to place this, if you're doing a presentation and you want to put all these crashes onto a satellite image, for example, along a long roadway or something like that, you can take this entire graphic, export it, drop it into another program that does vector graphic editing, like an Illustrator or like AutoCAD or like MicroStation, and put all those graphics in there and manipulate them there. And because they go out as vector graphics, meaning they're the actual lines, they're scalable, they're rotatable, you can select them, as opposed to as if this just went out as an image where you'd have to sort of copy and paste and try to get the little bits of the crash graphic all together. If you had this out as a vector image, when you clicked on it, you'd get all of the parts of it together. So we've had some consultants that have used that pretty extensively in their studies because, as you know, Crash Magic, when we're doing the diagrams, these are often not the final diagram that you're going to want to show if you've finally zoomed in on one place for a project. Great for isolating, great for categorizing locations and stuff like that. But when you're actually ready to do the project, it's the reason we have some of these editing tools here. But in addition to that, you may want to do, you know, a real site drawing that shows where the crashes happened, and that's what that's useful for. Okay. We have another ability, and some people had asked about this, and we haven't made it the cleanest yet, but we got the functionality in there, and so it's worth showing it to you and letting you know that hopefully this will be cleaned up even nicer in the future. One of the things you can do is you can add text to a diagram, just free form. And so what I've got here is I can say add a new annotation. I just clicked on this T down here. I can say add a new annotation. And so now I have this annotation here, and the text says annotation 1. And you see it's just been displayed right in the middle of the diagram. What's not so clean about it is I'd like to be able to just grab it and drag it like I can do with the crashes. Can't quite do that yet. I have to tell it where I want it to be. So if I want, for example, for it to appear down here, I need to know that my X location across the diagram is going to be, let's say, 200. And so that'll put it about over here, and then my Y location I want to be down at 0. Actually a little higher than 0, I'll make that 100. So now my annotation sits at the bottom of the diagram, even though I guess I did want 0. So why would you do this? You might want to be labeling, for example, the street names. And one thing that we've had people do, and this works very effectively, is you can create one of these annotations, because you can change, of course, what the text is. You can say that this is Coit Road. Okay, you can create an annotation that goes here and an annotation that goes here, and just label them, Street 1, Street 2, and that's all you put in there. Make that your diagram. Make that your template for your diagram, and then all you have to do, we'll actually do this right now. Let's align this. That's what this training is about, right? So I'm just going to move this over a little bit more. We'll make this 300, and it looks like this does not want to be quite on 0. We'll make that up at 50, and we'll call this Street 1. And I'm going to add another one over here. So I'll have a second one, and it will be Street 2, and our angle will be 90 degrees. And our X will be something like 900. And we can leave the other part alone. So there's Street 2. If I take this and I template it, and I say, let's put this as having street labels, I've now got a template that has street labels on it. So if I go to Preston and Park, and I say, let's make us a new diagram here, make ourselves a new diagram, and I choose my street labels one, I can now just go in here and say, okay, Street 1 is Preston. I may not have stuck that in there. Sorry about that. I have to apply it. Park, apply. Preston, apply. As I said, would rather be clicking on it, dragging them around, but if you're in a situation where you need to label your diagrams, you can do that. And you can put as many of these labels as you want on there. So you can put free-form text pretty much anywhere on the diagram using those methods. Any questions so far? Okay. So let's just do something to get rid of our annotations box over there. I think we could also just have clicked on the T, but now we're back to normal. And now we have that template. Worth noting in the program is you always have these templates. Anything you do to a diagram, to a report, a listing, a chart, what have you, any of those things you do, if you look at it and you say, oh, I'd like to be able to do that again, come down here, click on it, and make a template of that report. What that's doing is it makes it available in these boxes up here. When you click on one of those buttons and you go to choose a report, that will become one of your available reports, and it will then use the data in the study that you're in with that report and with that template to give you the exact same style of layout, the same settings, but of course changing the data to match the study that you're in. Okay, I'm going to take questions at this point, unless somebody can think of something that I've completely forgotten. That is our diagrams. And after I take questions, I'm going to show you some diagram features that are coming, and they will be here when we have the new rewrite of the program rather than with this version of the program. So I guess I'm saying probably end of the summer is when these things will show up. Always shoot for a conference that we do in August, beginning of August. Don't know if we'll make it. We might be just testing at that point. But I'll show you a new feature for diagrams. It's going to look kind of cool. So I'm going to go look for that while you're thinking of the important questions you have to ask. No, really, you have to ask important questions.
I've got something, Pete.
Oh,
I don't know if you wanted to show categories here so you could highlight the...
Good call. Yep, absolutely.
The crashes.
Yep, that sounds great. Okay, I'm going to highlight the crashes in just a moment. One thing I'd like to show you is the way the schematics, what we've been working on for the schematics is something that looks at the GIS system. If you have a ArcGIS server, we'll be able to look at that, and when you ask for a road intersection or a road segment, when we go to draw it, rather than just choosing from our generic four-leg intersections, it actually will take the center lines and it'll do offsets to create curb lines for them, following along the lines of the center lines, and it'll create areas for the crashes, and this is what your diagrams will start to look like. That does, as I said, require an ArcGIS server, but I think that's going to be pretty powerful. Let's see if I've got some more of these here. So this is an example of one of the ones we tried to render. Let's see if I've got one rendered now. That might just be this one. Yeah, that's the same as that. Let's see if we've got the, here we go. So that's how that last one would render. So this center line here, which has your north coming to south, extra street coming off the right side, off the east side, turns out like that in the schematic. And this will be without choosing anything. So basically, if we're able to render it, we'll be doing that automatically. And that's what your diagrams will just look like. If we're not able to, then we'll revert back to the ones we've had for 30 years, which are these that are predefined, four-leg T approach, and so forth. Okay. Question from Chris is, will we have this update will include corridors? Corridors are phase 2 for that. They are most certainly a part of the plan, but the first phase of this is going to be intersections. But corridors are definitely in the plans for that, for these new types of dynamic schematics. Okay, what Tanya just pointed out, and she may have noted that this particular diagram already has the accidents, all the crash graphics are color-coded. And you'll notice some of them are darker than others. Some of them are lighter. And what's going on is these have been highlighted by the time of day. And this is done down here with this category list. And you can take any category list you have in the program. In this case, we were using time of day. And the crashes were highlighted based on the time of day. I could choose severity and highlight those crashes based on the severity of the crash. Okay, or pick any field that you've created. If you've got a manner of crash, that's kind of a lot of colors to throw in there. Probably don't want to use that one. Vehicle directions. You can build your own. I think this time of day copy, we changed one of the colors in, perhaps, and so you get whatever you've created for that category list. These category lists are not just used for this purpose, just for the diagram. You can also use them for your listings. So if you've played with a listing before, here's a listing under the same study, and notice that the category list time of day is under the study. Therefore, anything in the study that can be highlighted will be highlighted. And so here's your listing highlighted by time of day in the same way that the diagram was. Let's see if Pete's useful report really is. This would be a layout, and if this is a layout, hopefully what we'll see is a diagram with a listing in there so you can see them both highlighted and maybe even a chart to go with it. Okay, so there is highlighted crashes by time of day, a time of day chart, and we don't have a listing in here, but that would be something else you could put in, is put a listing on there. We'll see if Pete's layout does any better. If you haven't played with layouts, in terms of presentation, there's sort of the equivalent importance to filters, but for presentation, as opposed to filters, which are really for the analysis side. So these types of layouts, and we have a very nice online recorded session of my doing layouts a few months back, but you can change on any one of these layouts what goes in each of these areas. So we have some layouts with just 2 images, layouts with 3 images, laid out all different ways, multi-page layouts, and so you can determine what reports you want to show, put them all together, and once you've done that, you just go to any study, say that's the layout I want, and you'll get this report for that particular study. Again, topic for whether one of the recorded sessions or come back for another layout session, but we have those out there. Where was I going with that? Forgot. Okay. So those are layouts. Those are category lists used in the layouts. And used in listings and used in the diagrams. Recall that anything that you use that shows up here is part of the study and therefore impacts any of the reports that are under that study. Right, so your diagram took effect with a clear filter and a time of day, 4-way intersection, clear time of day, and each of these is like that. That is these items down here. These 4 items down here affect the study. So this lets you move the study to another project, this filters the study, this does a category list for the study, and this exports the data from the study. Okay, questions? Otherwise we'll wrap up here unless we have some questions. Okay, well thank you all for sitting down and watching this today. And we do these every month, Wednesday and Thursday. We should take a quick peek at what's going on in the next one. See if I've got that somewhere. And we'll let you know what's in the next training. Homepage, mini trainings. These are our recordings, and we've actually got one from yesterday that'll go up. Oh, is that it right there? That looks like that's it. That's actually kind of interesting training. If you didn't make it, I did do a little bit of a different style. It's described there, and you can go watch that. So our next training will be a beginning training on August 2nd, and then a data entry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send out some emails and see if data entry is what everybody's into. It would be really great if we have either our GIS or our new schematic capabilities by then. We may switch to that. But if you have a special interest in seeing something with data entry, by all means let us know. We'll make sure we continue to use that on the 3rd. And I'm not positive of this, but we do have a trade show right around there. So keep an eye on the calendar to see if we change any of that up if we have a trade show on that day. Okay, as always, contact us if you have questions that you would like to see addressed in a training or that you would just like addressed right now, and we'll show it to you. We'll, just give us a call and we'll walk you through stuff. Thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.